Well, hey there, and welcome to episode number 509 of 6 Pixels of Separation, the Mirum Podcast. My name is Mitch Joel. It's Sunday, April the 10th, 2016. Let's get on with the show. So, who are you and what do you do?
So I am Michael Bungay Stanier. I run a small but perfectly formed training company here in Toronto. It's called Box of Crayons. And our big mission is to help people and organizations do less good work and more great work. But over the recent years, we've had this real focus on helping busy managers and giving them the tools to coach in 10 minutes or less. We really think coaching is this kind of foundational behavior, this foundational skill that can really help managers, leaders, individual contributors, everybody really focus on the stuff that matters and have more impact in the work that they do.
You've been working on this. You got your pitch down.
I have been working on it. I mean, I'm in this world of leadership and training, and I belong to this great group, which is people who run training companies, and it's full of fascinating, smart, successful people. But every year we gather in Arizona in March, which is, it's lovely because it's March and I live in Toronto and it's in Arizona. But it's so interesting to hear them talk about their companies, and they all kind of end up saying, well, I do leadership. And I'm like, you all sound like you're exactly the same. And, you know this better than I do, Mitch. It's that piece around going, how are you different and how are you interesting can make all the difference.
And you said, you had an interesting phrase there. I'm curious about. You said that Box of Crayons is perfectly formed.
Right.
That's a statement.
Well, yeah, it's a little glib, but we think really hard about who we want to be as a company and how we want to structure it. So we're very dispersed. We really strive to have fewer people rather than more people, but we're really looking for people who are wonderful. And there's people who, when you ask them to do something, not only do it, but they've done it in a way that is better than you can actually imagine doing it. And you're like, wow, I didn't even know that was the brief, but somehow you've hit the brief and have exceeded it at the same time. So trying to create that. But it's also a business model decision as well, which is like, how do you structure a company to make the money the way you want to make the money? And one of our values as a company, the two of them are elegance and to tread lightly. And those as corporate values influence the way we structure our company as well.
So, Michael, we've known each other for many, many years. I always really had in my brain that you were a person who was putting out, I like to call them small but big books.
Right.
They sort of are physically small, not a lot of pages, highly visual, but very, very powerful. I think you're probably most well known in the zeitgeist of the world for this amazing book called Do More Great Work. And
Yeah.
It is one of those books where whatever, like if it's my office library or I've got a home library and I have books in the I'm always like, oh, there's Michael's book. Like I have a couple of them sort of dispersed in different areas. You did the End Malaria book with Seth Godin. It was with Seth's imprint, right? With Seth.
Yeah,
Godin's
it was.
imprint?
That's right. You're a great supporter for us on that, which I'm deeply appreciative.
Yeah.
We can talk about that if you'd like. That was a that was a hell of a ride. You and I are both fans of Seth, but I have to tell you, he's 80% genius and 20% complete maniac. He's insane. Yeah. And so working with him was quite the rush around getting that book out.
Yeah, and now you've got this great book out called The Coaching Habit. And I always thought that you were someone who is putting out these very smart, sort of likable, grabbable books, and there was the speaking thing. And then as I sort of got to know you, I was like, oh, there's the coaching thing. But is the coaching thing the real business, and then the book is just something that sort of keeps you in the media and that the speaking supports getting new business? Or like what's the structure of how you meaning you, not the Box of Crayons business, what's your thing?
Yeah, Box of Crayons is a training company, and that's what we do. And when I started it, so we're 15 years old, and honestly, when I started it, I'd been living in Boston. My wife and I we decided Boston wasn't for us, so we'd gone down to the local pub. We each wrote the name of 3 cities on the back of a beer coaster. On the count of 3, we flipped them over. Toronto made both the lists, and so we decided on Toronto, even though I'd never been there before. And we had tickets to leave Boston on 9/11. So when I finally got to Toronto, not only did I not know anybody, but the job that I had lined up had vanished in the kind of the rubble of the 2 towers. So I started Box of Crayons shortly thereafter. And, my business model at that stage was say yes to anybody with a wallet. I mean, it was no more sophisticated than that. It's like, whatever you've asked me to do, I'm going to figure out how to do it, Googling and see what we can do there. But over the years, we've found our niche. We found the thing that we think we do differently and better than anybody else, and that's what I would say great work for me. Work that I care about, work that I think has a good impact in the world. And what's weird for me about that, Mitch, is I'm very skeptical about most corporate training. I think most of it's pretty terrible. It's slightly slow and patronizing and not that useful and not that memorable. But of course, that's both a frustration, but it's an opportunity for us to try and buck that trend. So we have a team of facilitators who deliver most of the training, and my job is increasingly just the extremely good-looking token guy at the front of the company. Not unlike your role. No, I'm kidding. But it's I write books, I give speeches, but that's got a marketing drive to it to increase the profile of the company.
So the other part is, people will look at the work and look at you and go like, who's this guy to like do all this stuff? Like what has he done? Like he's got a book out, yeah, but like, and I dealt with that, I think, for about, well, let's call it 15 years before It sort of went away. Do you sort of see yourself face that, where people are like, oh, I don't know what is this train? Like, who are you to train us type of thing?
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's in some ways it's only heightened by having a company called Box of Crayons, because it's a name that some people love, but there's other people in this world who would go, rest assured, I'm never hiring anybody from a company called Box of Crayons, because that's a ridiculous name. And at the same time, it's not something that I can control, other people's reactions to me. So all I can do is continue to frame my story about who I am and why I might be credible. And, having books out helps. I can point to labels like I was a Rhodes Scholar, and that some people like that and are impressed by that. But, honestly, Mitch, I also have this kind of slightly robust sense of self-esteem. So I'm like, you know what? If people are a bit rude about me, then it's not something I get too caught up in. I mean, do you know that
they're not a great client?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the whole point of a brand. I mean, again, you know this better than I do, but for me, the purpose of a brand is to instill a reaction, either a yes or a no. Because indifference is death. And I don't mind a strong no. I far prefer that to a wave of indifference, because a no means somebody's just going, yeah, you're definitely not for me, which is perfect.
I don't think many people go through their lives and they're like, yeah, like I'm friends with this guy and he's like a Rhodes Scholar. So we have you here. I'm sure most people sort of like their eyebrows went up when you said that. First thing is, I'm surprised that you said I was. Don't people who like, aren't you a Rhodes Scholar?
Yeah, that's true. I probably am a Rhodes Scholar. Well, I mean, it's interesting. It's a label that some very impressive people carry. Bill Clinton, Bob Hawke, an Australian Prime Minister. I mean, there's all sorts of interesting leaders and influencers in this world who you go, you're a Rhodes Scholar. You kind of got that. But there's a vast number of Rhodes Scholars who don't have that profile, who don't have that kind of fame, who are still Rhodes Scholars and good and interesting people. I mean, it's just watching the U.S. elections at the moment. So you've got 2 people. One is a guy called Cory Booker, who's this kind of superstar senator from New Jersey. He was a Rhodes Scholar in my year. So I'm like, I know Cory Booker. He's just got a New York Times book out. He's like this total superhero. At the same time, another guy in my Rhodes year was Bobby Jindal. He was actually one of the Republican candidates. And he's like this mad, right-wing, slightly lunatic-ish guy. And so you've got this kind of interesting mix of people who are typically pretty smart, pretty ambitious, I would say, certainly in the US context. And then there are also people like me who honestly feel like somehow we snuck in through the cracks in the door.
Well, so what is a Rhodes Scholar and how does one get one?
Sure. So Cecil Rhodes, the man who gave us the name Rhodesia and the like, made his fortune mining in South Africa. Had always wanted to be an Oxford man, and so created a scholarship. And when you read his when you read his initial kind of, this is who you have to be for a Rhodes Scholar, it actually sounds like something you'd read on Tinder. I mean, it's like you have to be a handsome, young, virile man, good and strong in limb and smart.
Boy,
in
you
brain.
really did sneak right on there.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty interesting to read. But basically, what they look for now are people who have really strong academics. I mean, you don't have to be the best in your class, but often people are pretty clever. A sport, you need to have a sport. There's an amazing number of Olympians who happen to become Rhodes Scholars as well. And you often have a sort of social aspect, a kind of I'm out there to save the world element to what you do as well. So you're looking for this kind of all-round person who is, the phrase is who is willing to fight the world's fight. So they're trying to find people who are willing to step up to do good in this world. And then the other secret to becoming a Rhodes Scholar is not to steal the teaspoons. And I tell you very quickly that story. So when I was being interviewed, one of the things that they do the night before the interview is we all go out for dinner. The 12 people who are interviewing, the 12 or so candidates. We're in Parliament House in Australia, so it's a super posh meal. Everybody's got this slight weird vibe on because we're all trying to be smart, yet self-deprecating, yet funny, yet not too uptight, but, got all of that going on. It's really kind of intense. And looking around these other people, I was like, I'm so sure that I'm not even in the top 12 of these 12 people. So I was like, what I'm going to do is I'm going to steal a teaspoon. So, I'll be able to show my children's children, this is the moment where I almost became a Rhodes Scholar. Here's my memento of the piece. But as the evening wore on, I forgot about that plan. And it turned out to be a lucky thing because as you leave the Parliament House, you actually go through a metal detector because clearly other people have tried to steal the teaspoons. Mm-hmm. So that was the other secret to my success is I didn't try and steal a teaspoon. That's part of what got me across the line.
You're being humble. So let's talk a little bit about the work you're currently focused on. This brand new book is out, The Coaching Habit.
Yeah.
And look, everybody who does a book about work, the promise is I'm going to have you create more work by doing less. And we sort of look at that as there's like an aphorism out there. And is that something that you prescribe to? Is that the idea of what you think it gets people into this idea?
Well, that's certainly a nice door to push on because there's few people in this world these days saying, my problem is I just don't have enough to do. I'm kind of, I'm playing Tetris on a Friday afternoon to while away the hours. Most of us in the state of overwhelm, overconnected, an overdependent team, overwhelmed by the amount of work coming at me. And it just doesn't make for a happy work experience and a happy life experience. So, it really connects back to that earlier book, Do More Great Work, where, we talk about helping people do less good work and more great work. In other words, saying you're never going to get on top of all of your work. I mean, it's impossible. We hope that if we read enough productivity hacks or the latest version of getting things done or the latest app to help us manage our email. We're going to get on one day, we'll get on top of everything. But I've just come to the realization that you'll never get on top of everything. There's always more work to do. And the more work you do, the more you generate more work than you can possibly cope with. So you're never going to, you've always got more work that you can do, but you've got to come to this point where you start going, so what's the work I will do? What's the work I have to get done because of a organizational obligation? But what's the work that I actually want to be doing, I really want to be focusing upon the work that has more impact, that has more meaning for me. And so I guess, Mitch, my goal is, it's not just a simple try and do less work, it's shift the equation so that the work you're doing is more great work and less of all the other stuff.
Is your experience that people have a choice / say in that? I know I do, right?
Yeah.
And I think I've created a life like that. I know you have. You've made, both physical choices of where you live to creating your own business, cottage industry stuff, and growing it at the scale and size you're comfortable with. I've done the same. But I look out at the vast majority of people, and I don't know that they can always feel so empowered. And it's the struggle I have, not with your work in particular, or the book that but just in general when I read a lot of stuff. I mean, there's a lot of people's books I read. I'm like, it's nice to say this stuff, but most people, for lack of a better word, feel very stuck. This is the work that I do. I have to, I'm stuck in it's hard.
There's no doubt it's hard. That's for sure. And I don't think most people have what I would consider the luxury that you and I have, which is quite a lot of choice about what we do and how we spend our time. But I do think it's too easy just to go, I've either got it all or I've got nothing. And to kind of flip back into the sense of going, hey, I've got no choice whatsoever. My job is I'm purely a small cog in the large machine, and I have to do everything anybody tells me, and I have no autonomy. I have no rights. I have no chance to make choices around this. When I have conversation when I'm training people and we talk about doing more great work, and I go, great, so let's have this conversation. What gets in the way of you doing more great work? And people get in small groups and they'll have a little brainstorm and they'll come up with all these ideas. And, the majority of them, I would call they challenges. If only they would give me more time, if only they wouldn't keep changing their mind.
This has nothing to do with me.
If only they were a senior executive team that had its, didn't have its head up its backside, created a strategy that could, there's a lot of they that goes on. But there's always people who come up with the how am I responsible for the work, the mix of work that I have in my life. And people talk to, I don't have the courage to say no. I don't spend time creating some focus. There's things that you can do that can make the difference. Now, you can't change everything, but the starting point is to say you do have some choices. There are small battles that you can fight and you can win. It's not about saying, I just want to do whatever I want at work and I don't want anybody to tell me what to do. But in fact, either you just become flotsam and jetsam on the river of life, hoping things change, and they won't. Or you go, okay, if I did have some choices, what would those choices be? Where are the battles I can fight? Where's the ground that I can protect? And that's the place to be looking at. I think not for everybody, but I think for most people, there is a degree of choice there.
Do you find that companies are more open to people raising that as the issue, or do you find that we live in interesting times? Here we are, where there is so much disruption, turbulence, global economies at play, uncertainty in my industry. We had a boon for many, many years, almost 10 years, where it was hard to keep people. Everyone's being offered jobs, and everybody needs people who can do digital, and you go on and on and on. And I feel like it's become ubiquitous now. And those people who are so easy to jump or skip, there aren't as many jobs out there because now there's we're in that place where it's working and it's happening and it's there. And so when I hear you say that, my immediate thought is I wonder how many companies would be open to an employee stating that, whether it comes from a place of dissatisfaction or even from a place of like, I really need to grow.
Yeah. I think it's an Alvin Toffler that said something like the future's here, it's just unevenly
Just
distributed.
not evenly distributed.
Yeah. So I think that's part of what's going on. And probably what I see is something like a confirmation bias, because the organizations that hire us at Box of Crayons tend to be the ones that are more open to this
Well, of
conversation
course, yeah,
anyway.
exactly.
So it
Yeah.
becomes a self-reinforcing experience for me. And having spent a reasonable amount of time in my career kind of thinking about large-scale change and organizational development and organizational change, part of the insight for me is to say it's really hard to talk about an organizational culture for the most part across all organizations. So there's just a single unified culture. There tends to always be subcultures. And I've just become increasingly of the opinion that often the most interesting unit for change within an organization is at that team level. So regardless of what your corporate culture is like, one of the things to be asking yourself is, what is my team like? And how could we be a force for almost a countercultural way of acting, and see what that's like? Because the hunger for autonomy and purpose and mastery. Dan Pink in his book Drive, he just, I think, does such a lovely job at articulating about these are the things that actually motivate people: purpose, autonomy, and mastery. And they're findable often within a team piece, whereas they may be a little more elusive at a business unit level or at an organizational level.
So I want to go back to you were on a riff about the issue being they, right? So
Yeah.
it's like other than me is sort of
Yeah.
the joke. Like when you were talking, my line was, yeah, this has nothing to do with me. This
Right,
is
exactly.
clearly everyone else.
As soon as they get their act together, then I'll do more great work. And I'm like, yeah, and what's the option? What do you reckon the chances are that they will get their act together? Because they're sitting in their cubicle going, as soon as they get their act together, then I'll be able to do my great work as
It's
well.
a Seinfeld skit, and
Yeah,
who are
exactly.
they exactly? But it's fun, and it's when I asked you that question in my brain, where I thought you were going to come back to, was this place of actually when you really scrape beneath the surface and get down to the guts of it, people are genuinely afraid to do great work. And what I mean by that is, I was told this story when I got my publishing deal, and my publishing deal really was one of those like crazy, like, major A&R guy walks into a bar, sees a band, signs them, and off you go. Like, so the
Right.
stories that never happened. It really was, had an introduction through Dan Ariely, who wrote Predictably Irrational. He
Yeah, I
was
love
like,
that
oh,
book.
let me introduce you to my literary agent, which to me sounded like let's do lunch if you're ever in my hood. But he actually did it. I go to New York, meet this literary agent, very, very good sort of energy. We decided we're going to move forward with it. He's like, yeah, I'll get back to you. I'm literally waiting for my flight back to Montreal from New York, and I get like an email with a contract from him. Like, here I am, staring at the New York skyline going, that's the dream, right? If you're an author,
That's
you get a
wonderful.
literary
Yeah.
agent in Manhattan and you go off it and do the thing. And yeah, he and I became friends and still are to this day. I'm very close with my agent, and we were talking about, you get these advances to write a book. And I was like, so finally you get an agent, then you get a publisher, and then you get an advance. And they basically are paying you to write this book and have it be successful. And he was telling me that there's a massive percentage of people who don't deliver the book, and they have to give back the advance, or there's a lawsuit. I couldn't
Wow.
believe it. I couldn't believe that after all of that effort,
Right.
you
Exactly.
finally get it. You get the stuff that all of us, if you ever write one and you can't deliver. And I
Yeah.
knew that in the music industry it happened, but just not at that large of a percentage. The music, you get advanced, you get in the studio, blah blah. And what we sort of got into this very philosophical conversation. He said, it's interesting that when you finally give someone the keys to the kingdom of what they think they want, more often than not, they can't deliver because they self-paralyze themselves.
Yeah, sure.
Some people call it writer's block. I mean, there's a million names for different parts of work, but it's very hard for humans to overcome themselves to get to that place where they're doing great work. And I was surprised that you were in the they world and not in the actual. And I'm wondering, is it true? Are people scared to do great work?
Well, I think they are. Well, at least I think there's fear involved when you do great work. I mean, we talk about three attributes that you need: focus, courage, and resilience. So by focus, I mean a sense of what you actually care about, a sense of what great work is for you, and then focus to find where the opportunities to do great work in your remit, be it writing a book or running a project or whatever it might be. But then the courage piece is to be able to say, look, one way of thinking about what good work is, good work is kind of business as usual. So as soon as you say, I'm going to do great work, it almost becomes a countercultural act in itself. It immediately creates resistance from the system within, sort of the homeostasis. And when you push into the system, it pushes back. And it takes courage to be able to say, because this is the question that's at the heart of great work, I'm going to say no to this so I can say yes to that. And I think, and the third piece just quickly is around resilience. Pick up Seth Godin's book, The Dip, and you'll get into that.
It's funny. I want to talk about that strategic question, the yes question. I want to talk about resilience. So let's sort of stop and break it into pieces. But I want to go back first before we dig into that, because I want to set the stage a little bit for that. So you have this book, The Coaching Habit, and as I was going through it, my feeling was, Michael is trying to get the management layer to be less about making sure people are doing the right thing or pushing down to people what they should do, but rather elevating the work, that business unit up, not to the management level, but just where there's a sort of peer level of each side where you are working together. And the role of these people is much more about showing people how to be better rather than telling them whether they're right or wrong or having them come to you to get a check mark. Is that fair?
Well, nobody's put it to me like that before, but, honestly, Mitch, one of the reasons that I now run my own company is because I found it so hard to work for a boss because my expectation...
You're like me, you're unemployable.
Yeah, I am totally unemployable and have been apparently most of my life. In part because my expectation about when I work with a boss is basically, sure, you may have a more senior title than me, but I'm a smart human being and you're a smart human being. So how do we partner on this to make it successful? I bring my enthusiasm and my smarts. You bring your enthusiasm and your wisdom and your smarts. And between us, good things happen. And so I love the fact that you're pointing to that peer place of saying... I guess I'd weave in the thought that, one of the key influences in my writing and in my work is a guy called Peter Block. He wrote The Flawless Consultant, which is wonderful if you're either an external or an internal consultant within an organization. And the answer to how is yes. He's a very thoughtful man in a kind of grumpy old guy sort of way. And I once heard him say that his way of seeing the world is it's about helping give people responsibility for their own freedom. I love that. That phrase brings shivers up and down my spine because what it says is you're a human being. Don't let yourself be infantilized in an organization. Show up as an adult, be an adult, treat others as adults around you, and accept that with freedom and the ability to make choice comes guilt and anxiety as part of that. And this is the messiness of being a human being, because if you're courageous...
It's the spectrum of emotions, right? Like you can't have just happiness as this thing.
No, exactly. And if you're courageous enough to make choices, basically you immediately have a guilt, which is around, what about those other choices that I'm saying no to? And then you have anxiety, which is, was that the best choice for me to make? What have I've committed to this path now. But with that comes freedom and the opportunity for great work and happiness and the like. So for me, and just this is a very long, rambly answer to your question, but I love it because nobody said this to me before. I would love the deeper outcome of this book and the work that we do at Box of Crayons to be about increasing the level of humanity in our organizations by saying, I'm going to give you the respect and treat you as a human being that has some capability and autonomy and a hunger for purpose and a hunger for mastery. And I'm going to do that by knowing that asking good questions is often an easier route to get there than telling you what to do.
So that's the next thing, which is coaching. People think of I look at it like, okay, let's look at the sort of spectrum of what's hard. I think coaching is the hardest. I think underneath coaching is managing, and then underneath managing is probably the questions. And what's interesting about your book and the way it was constructed is that it's set up in a way where the questions actually help you kill the management level and almost like black belt up to the coaching thing. Because I think for a lot of people, it's easy to have somebody come to them as a manager and go, I like this, I don't like this, or do it this way so that I can filter it up.
Yeah,
And I think a lot of people who work for managers don't realize the one rule of success. And there's only one, and it's uniform. It's B2B, it's B2C, it's small, medium, large, it doesn't matter, which is the one rule of working with a manager is to make them look good so they get a promotion.
Right.
That's it. There's nothing else. They're really, and people talk about, well, there's the team, and people really, even as an agency, what's our role? Our role is to make our client look amazing.
Right.
And the client isn't necessarily the brand always. It could be one or two people who work for the brand, without doubt. The problem, obviously, with coaching is that coaching, I think, is a lot harder than managing. It's a lot easier to say, I like it, I don't like it, check, versus trying to work with that person.
Yeah.
But the book supersedes that because it's based off of that idea of questions. And so I'm curious, you did a lot of work, obviously. You've done a lot of work to put these simple questions forward, but they're not simple. It's a complex thing to do. Do you look at this world and go, wow, if more people would ask what are these open-ended questions, they're not yes or no questions, that they could be better at communicating with people? Like, that's the idea here, right?
Yeah, I mean, the idea is to help everybody spend less time wasting their time and more time focused on the stuff that matters, so that people are doing work that has more impact and they're doing work that has more meaning. So, I mean, we debated about whether to call this book The Coaching Habit, because part of me wants to kind of blow up the idea that lots of people have about what coaching is, because it's a dated and I think not very useful understanding of what coaching is, because a lot of people go, okay, I've seen executive coaches. I think I kind of figure out what they do. They show up every month or every 2 weeks. They retreat into the office. They have a 45-minute, 1-hour chat about important stuff. And then they come back and they re-engage with work. And that is just not helpful for most people. That's a terrible role model for most managers and most leaders. For me, coaching is just an additional leadership tool, an approach to leadership that is, for the most part, just massively underutilized. Back in the year 2000, Daniel Goleman wrote an HBR article called Leadership That Gets Results. And he says, look, 6 different styles of leadership. The great leaders know how to use all 6 at the appropriate time. The typical leader, 2, maybe 3 of those different styles. And coaching was the least utilized of those styles. And I don't think that will have shifted in the 15 or 16 years since then.
Now, is the reason, and again, I only sort of came to this after reading your book and then thinking about, there's a sort of general statement out in the world that it's not about asking questions, but it's about asking the right questions. And I feel like you constructed this book in a way where it's almost like just ask these questions and sort of
Right.
go in this way. Is the problem that to date people don't know, like they think they're asking questions, they think they're
Right.
asking or active listening, but what they're really doing is they're not asking questions, they're setting up an answer that they want to hear.
Oh, totally. So like the fake question, have you thought of?
Yeah.
Have you considered? That's not a question. That's advice with a question mark attached.
Right.
Or even the fake active listening, because, lots of us know what that looks like now. You tip your head to the right a little bit. You put on that kind of concerned, furrowed brow thing, nod your head thoughtfully and slowly, make small grunting noises of encouragement. But actually, often what you're doing is you're just waiting for the other person to shut up so you can now tell them the answer that you've been desperate to tell them. And most of us have also had the experience of somebody who is truly listening to your answer, is kind of being fully present around that, and just what a difference that can actually make. So I think you're right. I think there's a lot of kind of dressing around what we're going to call coaching, which I don't think really qualifies for coaching. And in the book, we get into these seven essential questions, and there are a gazillion questions out there in the world, but striving for that Einstein quote around, things should be as simple as possible, but no simpler. Part of the design decision based in the book is what's the least I could share with people that would be the most useful. And so if I'm saying to managers and leaders, look, coaching is just something that could be really useful for you and for them. It's not about adding on to what you already do. It's about actually transforming the interactions that you currently have. Try out some of these 7 questions, see what difference that makes. See if that makes a difference between how you feel and how you spend your time, and how the people you're managing and leading and influence spend their time. And hopefully people build up a coaching habit based on that.
So you alluded to this question earlier. I want to bring it up again. It's the strategic question. If you're saying yes to this, what are you saying no to?
Right.
So when I read that question, I felt like I was lying in a therapist's office on the couch, and it becomes this sort of nut that you just cracked open, and out comes everything, and it becomes almost as messy as trying to figure out what you really need to get accomplished. And I'm wondering if you can empathize with that sort of idea, right? Like if I'm sitting with someone and I say, well, if you're saying yes to something, what are you saying no to? It's like sometimes I feel like it's like make work to answer the question, if you know what I mean.
Right. I think a plague in most organizations is an easiness to say yes to stuff, because that is the easy answer. Somebody comes up with an idea, yeah, we can do that. And there's not really the rigor to understand the opportunity cost. I can't remember who said this, but I love the definition somebody once said, which is strategy is when you say no to the stuff you really want to say yes to. And so when you first ask that question, if you're saying yes to this, what are you saying no to? And of course you can flip it around. If you're saying no to this, what do you want to say yes to? But if you say yes to something, what are you saying no to? And, honestly, the first 1 or 2 answers to that might be the easy things that you want to say no to. Well, that's great, fantastic. But where it becomes really valuable, I think, and where it kind of potentially creates the new insight, and generating insight is the first step of changing behavior and therefore increasing impact. What it forces you to do is to sort of go, what's the stuff that we have to step away from so that we can fully commit to the work that we want to do? So, when you gather with your founders at Mirum and you're thinking, okay, so where are we taking our business? What clients are we going to say yes to? What clients must we say no to? What areas are we going to specialize in? What are we going to say, even though this particular form of work that we do brings us revenue, keeps us happy, do we need to say no to that so we can fully say yes to this? That's when you get into the hardness and the messiness of the strategic process. And so for me, I don't really want people to feel like they're on a therapy couch, although there's nothing wrong with therapy. I do want them to feel that they're having the rigor of a strategic decision, because it strikes me that strategy, the courage to be strategic is rarer than you would think.
Yeah, it's just that's the common sense thing, right? It's not that common.
Right, exactly. I mean, and strategy is one of those words that you can just slap on anything, to make it sound better. It's like, I'm not eating a donut, I'm eating a strategic donut, so it's an important donut. And I'm like,
what is interesting about that thought, Michael, is that I don't know how many people think about their own career in a strategic sense. I think they think about the work they're doing in a strategic sense. I think that they look at the work that's on their plate and hope that if they're not the strategist, that this was somehow vetted through strategy, and that's why I'm doing it, because otherwise this is a complete waste of time. But I don't think people look at their individual tasks in the day, their role in the organization, and think about it as, what is my strategic imperative, like what's my strategy behind doing this role?
Yeah.
So few people. I mean, it reminds me of, Jeffrey Gitomer wrote the Sales Bible and a billion other books. he calls it homework. It's like, he goes, what, you think you finished school, you're done homework? Every night there's homework. You got to do your
Right.
reading, you got to stay up on the word. And I mean, look, he's older than you and I. He comes from a different generation for sure, but
Yep.
it's really applicable. And yeah, I've told the story a million times in a million different shows, but he said as a kid he'd come home and his dad would be there, and again, very different generation,
Mm.
sitting on the man chair or whatever the pilot's chair it is, and he would come home from work. Mother would make dinner, sitting there, grumping in front of the TV eating his dinner, and he had a notepad, and taking notes, taking notes. And when Jeffrey got older, Dad, what are you doing? I said, I'm doing my homework. I'm making the people I have to see. I'm making the notes for tomorrow, preparing. And he told me that story years and years ago, and it illuminated me because whether it's on a computer or a notepad, I find I do a lot of homework for my
Yeah.
work too. I'm sure
Right.
as I'm saying this, you're like, yeah, I do as well. But most people, honestly, most people don't. I just don't know if people bring that rigor to their own jobs. Like, what is my strategy of
Right.
of this job title?
Well, to me, that connects back to that block quote that I loved and talked about earlier, that giving people responsibility for their own freedom. It's like you actually have this freedom, but you actually have to work at it. It doesn't just play out. You actually have to become the author of your own destiny as best. I mean, you never control the outcome, but you really can show up and control the process. And that often gets you to the outcome that you're hungry for and hoping for. I mean, in the Do More Great workbook, one of the most popular chapters, one of the most popular exercises, a classic 2x2 consultant matrix, and it's called the I care, they care matrix. And it's so you can imagine, a box with a cross in it. So you've now got 4 small boxes within the larger box. And along the bottom axis is I care, and that's kind of plus or minus. And then on the vertical axis is they care, plus or minus. And for me, the they tends to be either your boss, just to your point before about keeping your boss happy, or sometimes your boss's boss. It's a nice way to think a couple of levels up. And it's a really neat exercise to think how you spent your last 2 weeks and what tasks you're involved in. And there's a ton of little tasky things that you were doing, and to map it out in that box. So some things are going to go in the I care, they care box. You care about doing it, and you think your boss does. A few things might make it into the they don't care and I don't care box in the bottom left-hand corner. But of course, the interesting ones are often in the 2 other boxes. So one of those will be they care about it, but I don't care about it. So in other words, you have to get this done, but you really wish it wasn't part of your job description. And then the other one is you care about it. So this might be great work for you or top end of your good work, but they don't care about it. And what's interesting is once you map out how you spend your time, you then have some choices about what you want to do with that information. How do you grow the stuff in the I care, they care box? How do you sell the stuff in the I care, but they don't care? So how do you make them care about it for the stuff that they care about, but you don't care about? So how do you shrink that or speed it up or delegate it? And then how do you stop doing the stuff in the I don't care about it and they don't care about it? But that's just an example, but it's an example of the homework you're talking about, which is this is your life. You only get one shot at this as far as I'm aware. So you either get to be a passive person rolling through your life, or you get to be an author and shape it. I'd encourage you to take the second option if you can.
And the last area I want to cover with you is resilience, because that was the other part. You sort of just traipsed
Yeah.
through that and traipsed through the dip. And resilience is a word that I think a lot of us are hearing more and more. We're hearing it even down to our kids in elementary school, and they're trying to teach young children resilience in
Mm.
school. You sort of tossed, Seth Godin, The Dip, which is a book that's been out for a long time. But I feel, and I'm curious your perspective, this is new. Like, we had this sort of mindfulness thing, which is still very hot in the corporate
Yes.
world. And I really do feel that, like, what's happened with mindfulness in the past 4 to 6 years is now sort of like reenacting on this idea of resilience. So one, I was hoping that you could define what resilience is in terms of business so people understand that. And two, um, how you make it applicable to the work you're doing. And again, I would say, like, it's to use a turn of phrase from Gladwell. I mean, resilience feels to me like it's really taking hold because of the work that Brene Brown has been doing on vulnerability
Right.
and stuff like that. But I'm curious about your take on it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think you're right. There's been that rise of mindfulness, and I think resilience has blossomed as part of that because, one of the structures around resilience for many people is a mindfulness practice. I have to tell you, I don't know, do you have a mindfulness practice of your own, Mitch?
I've been in the world of meditation and journaling for like since the late 80s. So
Right.
when people talk about mindfulness, I don't sort of like recoil, but I don't
Yeah,
think mindfulness is like I'm going to be mindful for 15 minutes, if you know what I
right.
mean. I think mindfulness is the outcome of the work you do on yourself so that when you are conscious and speaking to
Mm.
people, you are in mindfulness. But I feel like it sounds too hoity-toity when I say it, so I tend to shy away when people talk about it.
Yeah, I get what you're saying entirely, and I've tried a bunch of things around that. Honestly, I've tried so hard to build a meditation practice because everything you read, it's like this is it, 15 minutes meditation, and boom, you listen to Tim Ferriss, and he's like, 85% of my high performing guests all have a mindfulness practice, and I'm like, oh, I'm so bad. Why can't I build this? But and I love how you put it. One of the things that I am aware of is I spend a fair amount of time trying to reflect on who I am and seeing where my strengths are, where my vulnerabilities are, what the patterns are of behavior that drive me crazy about myself and drive others crazy around that. Because I think one form of, you could call it mindfulness, you could call it an understanding of resilience, you could call it emotional intelligence, which is your own capacity to notice yourself in a situation and make a decision about whether that behavior is serving you or whether you need to change that behavior. So, when you ask what a definition of resilience is, I don't have a glib answer to that. I don't think it's that ability to bounce back. That feels kind of too action man-ish. It feels different than that to me, but perhaps it's something, to use a metaphor instead, is something about to strive to be like bamboo. In earthquake zones, bamboo is often a building material because it has that ability to flex and sway with the earthquake so that the building itself manages to kind of ride that rather than break because of its rigidity. And I think there's a degree of which resilience is around how do you, I mean, this is now we're going total woo-woo here, Mitch, but it's like, how do you build your kind of your inner bamboo quality to allow you to be able to ride the disruptions that inevitably happen?
So do you, and again, this is like, you say like, what's your practice? When do you find time? And it's like my flippant answer was going to be a buddy of mine launched this great app called OMG, I Can Meditate. And like, I'm not joking. Like, it's a great app. And there's also Headspace and other apps
Yes.
where like you can just hit the button. And when I say like I didn't want to be like that, it's because if you want to exercise, there's a million exercise apps. If you want to lose weight, there's a million apps that help you track your food and do all this. And
Yeah.
like your smartphone can basically be, my friend Andy Nelman said it was the remote control for your life if you want it to be. So like there's always like, again, it's not a question of like I have to go take this course. The course is in your pocket if you just want to access it and
Right.
use it. But the challenge is that people just are in general are overwhelmed. I think it's why they turn to content like the thing we're creating right now. I think it's why they turn to books like The Coaching Habit or do more great work. Do you look at that work and think in the body of work that you're doing that people are becoming more enlightened, or are they just feeling more and more inundated?
Well, I think so. The answer is yes. I think to that.
I love
I,
doing that, by the way. That's my favorite. That's my favorite way to avoid
I know. It's like, yeah, people are totally becoming, I think,
more enlightened, but completely overwhelmed still.
overwhelmed, inundated. Um, and, that can show up just how you spend your time working at work, but it can also spend your time about how you get pulled left, right, and center about self-improvement stuff. I'm trying to become a better person, so I'm going to dabble in this, then dabble in that, and dabble in the other thing. And I'm really, it reminds me of the work of Leo Babauta from Zen Habits, who's, he's one of these people who is massive and is just this incredibly lovely, humble man. But one of his key insights around building Zen habits is you do it one habit at a time. And, because I've been on the virtual road talking about this book, and I often get asked, so, what are all the things we should be doing to put your book into play? I'm like, honestly,
Read page one.
Don't do a lot of things. Pick a habit, pick a question, pick a moment, and look to build a new habit in that moment with that person with this question. And don't let me add to your overwhelm, but just let me add one small thing that could make a big difference. And it's, that's that useless advice from guests like me, because, I look at my own life and I go, God, I totally suffer.
I'm a mess. I should read my own book.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I certainly am aware of my own SOS, the shiny object syndrome. It's like, oh, here's a new thing. Here's an interesting thing. And, in some ways, they always say you teach what you most need to learn. And so I love the fact that you pointed to that strategic question, the yes and the no, because I know that's the question that I so often keep coming back to myself to go,
Yeah, we all do.
God, okay, Michael, you're in that place of feeling frazzled again. What do you want here? That's another one of the questions in the book. What do you want? And if you want that, what are you willing to say no to so that you can truly say yes to that?
Yeah, and the problem, like I think the exponential problem is when you really do enjoy the things that you should be saying no to, and it's something
Right.
you alluded to earlier. It's a great book. I mean, The Coaching Habit, again, congratulations, really
Thank
strong
you.
work. I think it's an important read for everybody. I think, you can sort of look at this and go, well, I don't manage people, or I don't. It's a very good read, and I think Dan Pinker, someone said it best, which is when you read a book like this, it's not about how well you'll coach others, but actually it'll really help you maybe become the best coach for yourself, which is a really valuable component as well. Michael, let people know where they can best connect your work online.
Sure. So anything about the book, thecoachinghabit.com, anything a little bit about us at Box of Crayons, boxofcrayons.biz, B-I-Z or B-I-Z, depending where you are in this world. And if there's a social media place I hang out, it's either on Twitter, which is at Box of Crayons, or on LinkedIn, where I am the only Michael Bungay Stanier.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Michael.
Mitch, it's a total pleasure. Thanks for having me on the show.